Hello, Johan. It's great to have you on.
Hello,
So,
Nack. Fine to be with you.
yes, indeed. The main issue today, of course, is Greece. Greece, and what exactly is it that TSIPRAS is doing? Is it, as some of the headlines are suggesting, that he has betrayed the vote, the 61% OXI that he got? Or is it that he has caved in to the what no longer is the TROIKA? What is your take on that? And generally speaking, what is the underlying conflict?
Okay, the underlying conflict. I think that's a misreading of TSIPRAS. I think what he's doing is accepting the French advice, the French committee that came to Athens to help drafting it. Namely, accept the suggestions for reform of the Greek economy, particularly 2 points, the pension system and collection of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Accept that, but that does not mean that he accepts the bailout conditions in general.
All right.
More particularly, there are two things that he is definitely wanting, in addition to, of course, a third bailout in order to carry Greece over the current difficulty. And the two things are, point one, to stretch the whole thing, the whole payment, in time. Not to reduce the total amount, but to stretch it in time.
Yeah.
But then comes the second point, and that's, of course, on debt relief. Now, if you look at the, let us say, the time factor, say that you stretch it into 2050.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, there would definitely have been some debt relief. I'm saying it a little bit facetiously, but he's not caving in. He is accepting what I think he has to accept, and then insisting on the other points. And he is, if you will, gambling on his triple democratic legitimacy. He is himself democratically elected,
Mm-hmm.
is backed by a democratically elected parliament that just has voted in favor of what I am now indicating. And that, in a sense, brings us to the sovereign, the ultimate sovereign in a democracy being the people, and he has a referendum. Now compare that to the Eurozone people. It is no longer a troika because IMF is opting out. It's very clear. At the same time, there is a split at the top between Germany and France. But leaving that aside, they have no democratic legitimacy whatsoever. The democracy deficit being the persistent critique of the European Union.
You mean, of course, the fact that the Commission is making decisions without including the populations, the nations in Europe?
Well, of course, there is no referendum, but they're not even including the parliament.
Yep, 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 yep.
And you know, it is this famous, I don't know how widespread this was on world television, but when finally there was somebody addressing the parliament, quite a lot of the parliamentarians had put in front of themselves big posters with the word OXI, the Greek word for no, indicating where they were. And you had a very angry commissioner confiscating some of the signs.
Yes.
Now, as we all very well know, a short while ago, the European Parliament was not permitted to vote on a much more important issue than Greece. Greece is only 2% of the product of the European Union. It's a trifle. But much more important is the TTIP, the treaty.
Yes, absolutely.
They were not permitted to vote on it because there was the well-founded hypothesis that a preliminary vote at least would be against. Now, what does that say for democracy? It speaks oceans. Greece stands out not only as David against Goliath, but as democracy against bankocracy, or whatever one should call it, technocracy, autocracy, but not democracy. So here is one way of trying to...
If you could speak up a little more into the microphone, that would be excellent. I hear everything, but it's a bit low.
Here I am again, sorry. The next question.
Perfect. So your point here at this point is that one should pay very close attention to the difference in tenor, if you like, of democracy or democraticness or responsiveness of the two systems that are interacting here, European Union and Greece.
The legitimacy. You know, you can say that what the Greek people were saying was that they rejected austerity. Now, if you have austerity combined with an economy where you cannot use a very basic mechanism, namely to devalue your currency, then you are in a tough situation. If they could devalue it, they would of course make Greek export products much more competitive abroad. And at the same time, if they were able to avoid inflation and deflation, make it possible to get out of austerity. But being in the Eurozone, they cannot do that. And they don't want to leave the Eurozone. In the mandate, the no vote last Sunday, there was no mandate to leave the Eurozone. The mandate, you may say, was to reject the bailout condition that had been put forward. But that's something else. So here we are, and you can say that the Greeks want, in a sense, to get the best of both worlds. They want to stay in the Eurozone, yet to have their alleviated.
To have their... Oh, Skype is letting us down. Sorry, Skype let us down the last 10 seconds. Could you just repeat? You say they want to have it both ways? They would like to have their...
They would like to have less austerity and at the same time being in the Eurozone.
Yep.
And the proposal put forward is an effort to try to get the best of two worlds. But here I have to add something, Marco, something important. You see, I'm not saying that Greece is innocent and that the Eurozone is the culprit and the perpetrator. If you look at the history, they have behaved atrociously to each other. And it started, of course, with Greece applying for entry on the basis of faked national accounts, faked by Goldman Sachs. How much they paid Goldman Sachs for that little job, I don't know. But I know one thing. Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, himself worked for Goldman Sachs. Maybe a reason why this point is not so easy to bring up. But the Greeks then continued milking the European Union, and there seemed to be no country that has claimed so much agricultural support for non-existing farms. That will say, in apartments in the center of Athens, claiming to have 4 cows or whatever. Literally speaking, milking. Now, some of what happens now is revenge for that, is punishment for that. And in that punishment, you also find something relatively nasty, and that is the German idea of the Greeks being somewhat at a lower level, lazy, not hardworking, profligate. And with that kind of idea floating around, one is of course reminded of old German racism, with German people being at a higher level. I'm not accusing Merkel of that. It's not a question of any particular person. It's more a question of deep culture of a nation.
Would you say...
The Greeks are very sensitive to this and have brought up that point repeatedly. But underlying all of that, since you were asking for underlying conflict, Michael, I would say I think the underlying conflict is, and that is not very comforting for us, 1,600 years old. The 395 split between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox. And that dividing line was the dividing line between the Western European Empire, the Catholic part, soon to collapse, incidentally, and the Eastern Roman Empire, the Orthodox part, that managed to hang on more than 1,000 more years. Now, Greece was a part of that one, being Orthodox. Not 100%, nothing is 100% in religion, but Greek Orthodox means that they have the other Christianity. The wrong Christianity from the point of view of the overwhelming majority of the 28 member countries of the European Union, Catholic and Protestant. And if you look at the Greek newspaper, it's also very clear that they have the wrong alphabet. In other words, there is a cultural gap, and a gap with a long and complicated history. And I can then say that as the Greeks were milking benefits, pretending cows that they didn't have, the European Union and IMF have been investing in the Greek debt, milking the debt for what it is worth. Now, the IMF has a very interesting expression. They said that for this to happen, the debt has to be sustainable.
Yes.
Sustainable debt.
Yes.
That's an interesting concept. It's a little bit different from sustainable growth. And they had come to, a little bit late, the conclusion that the Greek debt was not sustainable. So they opted out. What is a non-sustainable debt? Well, it's obviously a debt of such a kind that if you claim it as a creditor, the basis for paying the debt will decrease and decrease until you get economic collapse. So IMF discovered that, and the Eurozone somehow did not. And here you can, of course, say that if they have economists and politicians who are capable of coming up with a European Central Bank without a European Finance Ministry, Treasury, as the Americans would say, if they have that kind of people, then they are capable of any mistake. Well, IMF has corrected its course and opted out, as I have said.
Basically, you're pointing at the difference between the, if you like, centralized element of a federal state and confederation in terms of the centralization of the fiscal policy.
Precisely. You know, Washington has a Department of Health, Education, Welfare, of course very much criticized by the extreme right in Washington. That belongs to the picture. But that ministry, that department is important and can come to the assistance when there is a problem with health, education, or welfare in a member state. The European Union has nothing corresponding to that.
But this is a fundamental institutional setting, a part of the European Union.
Widely speaking, and it has been pointed out by many from the beginning, you cannot go half the way. You cannot just have a single currency, a euro, and not have the institution that has to come with it.
In your
you can common currency, not single, but common currency, euro. You could have all the euro coins and bills using them. Now, they would have different value in the local currency as you go along. But there would be a common currency which would mainly be used, I think, like the ECU, the European counting unit, was used, mainly digitally. That they could have. So there are different options.
But here, if you say this...
I think the point of the Eurozone is to try to get the institution going before other countries start contemplating. Not necessarily Spexit, Spain exit, or Yexit, Italian exit, or Pexit, Portuguese exit, to stick to the jargon, not necessarily that, but claiming loan conditions similar to what Greece is hoping to get.
Fundamentally, this is quite risky because with this institutional sort of birth deficiency, in a way, of the European Union, this problem could be repeated in several instances among the so-called gypsy countries, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Spain. That could be repeated, actually.
Could be. I'm not so sure that it will. It may be that there will be something negotiated behind the doors about this aspect. Could also be that instead of them asking for changing the conditions, there will be some implicit reward at some point or another.